Right, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Thursday, 2nd of October. Welcome everybody that's joining us for this afternoon session called Safe Seasons, Protecting Customers and Staff, Strong Employee Screening and Empowerment. We're going to give a minute or so for other people to join this virtual auditorium. So for those of you that have joined already, please on the chat there, say hello and where you're from. Say this is Pete from Pietermaritzburg or in the chat there, so we can see where people are hailing from that are joining us from around the country. I see it's not much happening there. It's rather quiet. There we go. Donnell from Cape Town. Welcome, Donnell. Yvonne from Greytown. Oh, fantastic. There we go. Hi. East London. Welcome. Alistair. Nice to have you here. Keith from Joburg. I said the other day, isn't it remarkable with this technology that here we've got Durban, Joburg, East London, Cape Town. There's Ronwin from Mpumalanga. I mean, all joining us from all over the country. There's Clarksdorp. Hi, Aname. Welcome. And Norsy from Joburg. It's just fantastic that we can get together like this with this new technology. Just impressive. While the room is filling up with some more people, just a little bit of admin from our side. The chat where people are saying hello now, please use that purely for the chat to say where you're from. If during the course of this webinar you've got any questions, please use the Q&A. You'll see at the bottom there's a Q&A block. We've got people on hand who will answer those questions on the fly. If there's still some questions remaining over at the end, we will address those if time allows. So yeah, the room is filling up slowly. There's Thilo from Durban. Welcome, Thilo. And we'll give another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll kick off. There's Tony from Joburg. How's it, Tony? Claire from Kimberley. Another Kimberley person. Welcome, everyone. It's really nice to see. Hillcrest, KZN. Do we have someone from the Free State? Someone from the Northern Cape? Right. Okay, I'm going to wait till 14:03 and then we'll start. There we go. There's Maureen, another one from Hillcrest. Hi, Maureen. Welcome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to this Thursday afternoon webinar hosted by LexisNexis. The topic being safe seasons. We're heading towards this silly season. And protecting customers and staff, the importance of strong employee screening, the empowerment of such employees, and of course, how management deals with that as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you will find this webinar engaging. I'm going to start off with an anecdote. Actually, it's not an anecdote. It's a story. It's a true story, a personal one. And actually, there are two of them. The one was just last week. My wife and I and son and wife and grandson went to the Spur, and I hadn't been to the Spur, I think, in 30 years, but we went there because the young grandson wants to play in that little play area. And the thing that really impressed me is within minutes, seconds of him going into that play area, a supervisor came out, put a tag on my grandson's arm. On his tag was written his name, the cell phone number of his dad, for all the while that he was inside that play area. That's my one story. The other story, it's a personal one. Many years ago, actually not that many, but my brother and I, we're both keen on swimming, and we were worried about the state of the swimming pools in Johannesburg. So we made a list of the pools that were in a certain sort of radius from us in Johannesburg, and we identified 15 swimming pools that we wanted to go and check out. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of those pools were built in the 1950s and the 1960s with quite interesting architecture as well. The pool sort of pavilion and the big pool clock on top of a little tower and so on. Anyhow, we made the list of our 15 swimming pools, and one Saturday morning we went and we swam in all 15 of them. We would go to the swimming pool, swim 2 lengths, take a couple of photographs of the building and the little pavilion and the bleachers, and then get in the car, race off to the next swimming pool, swim out 2 lengths, and literally rinse and repeat what we were doing. if memory serves me, probably 3 or 4 of those swimming pools, the lifeguard came up to us. Now, bear in mind, we're 2 mid-50-year-old blokes. The lifeguard came up to us and said, "Hey, you guys aren't allowed to take photographs." And then we'd taken photographs of the building and, sort of the old pool with the tiles and so on. And we couldn't kind of figure it out. Anyhow, we finished our swim for the morning, went back home at lunch, told the story to the others at the lunch table. And they kind of looked at us as though we were completely stupid and said, "But of course you cannot take photographs at the swimming pool. I mean, that is as obvious as anything." My brother and I didn't think about that. But now I look back and I think, well, that's food for thought, and full marks to that lifeguard who, one of 2 things, was trained to know what is permissible or not, and 2, had the authority and the confidence to come up to us and say, "No, you're not allowed to take photographs." And it's obvious because there are children that are running around at that swimming pool. So that to me was quite an interesting lesson to learn at the time. And like I say, full marks to that lifeguard for knowing what is permissible. And the same at the Spur with a little tag. And where does that come from? And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And it comes from having a policy. It comes from up top in your organization. So whether you're running a retail chain, a logistics hub, a large shopping mall, your people are your front line. And I mean, during these peak periods that we're going into now, I mean, the risks don't slow down. In fact, they amplify, they go up. So today's session really is about building that culture of safeguarding and policy with respect to your employees, your staff, so that everybody and your customers ultimately feel protected and respected in the public domain. So in the short time, we're going to be looking at the compliance policies, effective staff training, some comprehensive checks that Alan is going to take us through a little bit later, and how we apply this really in the real world. So I'm joined today by our 2 experts, Mark Hardwick. Mark is the founder of The Guardian, dates back to 2009. They are leaders in child protection and safeguarding, and his team provides everything from clearances and policies to investigations and anonymous reporting tools. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And The Guardian stands as South Africa's only fully outsourced, proactive and reactive safeguarding company. Mark, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Joining Mark today, we've got Farad Bayat. So Farad is the founder of an organization called Ferocian. Now, Ferocian are specialists in social media screening. I mean, how prevalent is this not in our current world? And Farad helps organizations navigate the complexities of online behavior, all that scary stuff, through tailored policies and staff training. And this includes social media screening, social media readiness training, policy and design. So Farad, super having you here as well today in this panel discussion, and lovely having you here. So, gentlemen, the festive season is upon us. So vigilance is important, and we need, but I look at that and I think what we're going to talk about is something you should have all year round. It doesn't need specific focus just for the festive season. It's something that should be in place. I always think it's a little bit like drafting a will. You know, people always run to the lawyer to have the will drafted before they fly overseas. The odds of the plane going down is very small. You should have your will in place throughout the year. And today is exactly the same. So let's dive in how we can build smarter workplaces. Mark, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Let's start with the foundation. I mean, the word safeguarding, I've now used a number of times. I see it used quite a lot. Safeguarding in the workplace, in organizations, regardless of industry. What does this really mean? Mark?
So, thanks, Stuart. I think it's I think it's a word that gets used incorrectly regularly. And I think it's important that we understand the difference between the two because there is an obligation in this space. And very often, safeguarding and safety are almost used interchangeably. And in all honesty, they're not exactly the same thing. So safety is what we put in place to ensure that the environment doesn't hurt or injure anybody that comes into that environment. And as a business owner or anybody working in business, we're aware of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which obviously dictates things like evacuation processes, have your fire hydrants, during COVID, wear your masks, etc., etc., etc. So how the environment may place someone at risk, we then put safety mechanisms in place to mitigate that. Safeguarding is the realization that when two people come into contact with each other, there is going to be a relationship that is formed. Now, that relationship may be an employer-employee, it may be a client and a person that's an employee of the company. It may be between manager and subordinate. But the reality is that when people come together, a relationship is formed, and safeguarding sits in that space because if we can accept that people are obviously going to form this relationship, there's always the possibility that that relationship can go toxic, that we can identify things like abuse and exploitation and neglect and harassment and sexual harassment and all of those spaces. And so that's kind of where safeguarding sits. It is different from safety, and it's certainly something where we need to be clear that if someone is a fay with what needs to happen from a safety perspective, safeguarding may not be the same thing. So there's a very real need to ensure that those responsible for it are educated. And I think it's important to bear in mind that safeguarding in itself has, some core principles. I mean, the core principles within the safeguarding space is first, like you mentioned, prevention. We need to make sure that we have the right policies, we have the right culture, and we have the right structures that will reduce harm before it occurs, because that's really where we want to be. The next principle we want to consider is protection. We want to make sure that we've got clear reporting and response systems when a concern is raised. Then the third principle we would look at is empowerment. Like we need to make sure that we're giving staff the confidence to speak out and know that when they do speak out, they will be heard and supported, and they won't actually be ridiculed or disempowered because they've come forward. And then finally, the final core principle is accountability. So leaders need to be taking responsibility for these safeguarding practices. And
Yeah.
I just to kind of take it a bit further is to go like, why do we want to do that? And we want to do it because we have human rights obligations, we have legal compliance obligations, there's
Mhm.
reputation and trust that organizations need to consider, performance and culture, and then obviously there's the moral imperative. So I think in closing, safeguarding isn't just about preventing the worst thing from happening. It's about creating workplaces where people feel safe, supported, and able to give
Yes.
their best. And that's something that really every industry should care about.
Yeah. Mark, that's jolly interesting, and I'm going to come back to some of those things that you've raised now, especially the question regarding um, sort of leadership accountability, anti-retaliation measures, that kind of thing. I'm going to get back to that a little bit later, but
Sure.
I want to just jump to Farad here quickly. Mark mentioned the question of a relationship between two people that sort of potentially can go toxic, which creates all sorts of sort of call it downstream effect. Farad, I want to ask you, in the digital realm, in my mind, it is actually far wider, the risk and the exposure, than just a relationship between two people. Would you, Farad, see that safeguarding in the digital realm, that it must be different, or do you see something different than just the kind of a one-on-one relationship? Farad, have you got some thoughts on that?
Hi, George. Yes, yes, I do. Everything, I agree with everything that Mark has said. Um, from the digital side, it's just a little bit more complex because it's not restricted to physical location. Right?
Yeah.
So we've got the internet that expands our reach exponentially. So from a digital perspective, the safeguarding isn't just necessarily from a one-on-one perspective, because you also have your passive observers who can be affected by the content or interactions that are being consumed. So from a digital point of view, the safeguarding activities and steps that need to be taken are different, if I can put it that way. So I'll sort of try and frame it as such. There's all sorts of studies that I'm sure lots of people who are attending today have heard about, of things like the suicide rates of teens and people in their 20s because of social media usage and
Yeah.
responses has increased, right? So there's a duty of care, as I've heard Mark use that term many times. There's a duty of care that users also have in terms of the impact and consequence of their posting, of their engagement, of their retaliation, potentially. So it has a further ripple effect because what we consume and what we engage in lands up affecting our in-person behavior as well. So it's not just from a mental and an emotional and psychological standpoint that there is a caution and we have to take care from a digital point of view. That translates into physical interactions over time. We've all seen things in the news recently, specifically relating to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And then you start to see rhetoric being spewed from all sorts of different sides, right? Where one side says, oh, this was a left-wing person, oh, this was a right-wing person. And it gets all very heated. And then that in itself lands up spilling over into the quote unquote real world. And it lands up having quite severe consequences, either physically or even from a career standpoint. There are numerous people on both sides of the fence. If we are specifically looking at what's going on in the United States at the moment, who are actively trying to get others fired because of their online behavior.
Yeah.
If you're either on the left side of the fence or the right side of the fence, it doesn't actually matter. But there's active participation because people are leaving digital breadcrumbs and trails of their potential infringements.
Yeah. Interesting, Farad. I'm going to come back to that shortly, but I want to go back to Mark quickly. Mark, you were speaking earlier now about leadership, accountability, and empowerment. And I just want to stand still with respect to that empowerment. So if you look at whistleblower policies as an example, so a lot of organizations have whistleblower policies or something in place where people can report things and so on. But the effectiveness of those things vary. It really depends on how they are designed, as far as I can sort of understand, and whether they are trusted by the employees. So can you elaborate a little bit about that sort of empowering staff? What is required from a managerial point of view to empower your staff so that they trust their call it their authority or their management, that management has their back? Do you have some thoughts regarding that, Mark?
Yeah, easy. So to me, it's kind of going, all right, and to drill back a little bit into what I said just now in terms of understanding that the safety and safeguarding is different using those definitions, but there is another difference. The safety is a box ticking exercise. Once we have put safety in place, then those mechanisms have been met. The reality is that safeguarding isn't the same thing. Safeguarding is not an action, it's a process. Safeguarding is something that we need to be doing to get to a place where we essentially change culture. And so when we change culture, and that happens as a result of leadership behaving and acting in a way that they want those safeguarding cultures to play out within the organization, right? So empowerment means equipping staff with knowledge, confidence, and authority to act when they see or feel that something isn't right. And it removes the idea of kind of going, well, that's not really my job. Because could you just imagine being in in a office, and all of a sudden something catches on fire, and someone looks at that and goes, I'm not the health and safety guy, so it's not, we would never do that, right? So we
Yeah.
need to empower people similarly within the safeguarding space. And when we talk to schools and when we talk to sports associations, and I say to them, you know what, when you know that your culture is right, is when you can stand back and you can
Mm.
watch and know that people are comfortable to talk. Like, I want a coach or a teacher not to be saying to a learner, for example, if you feel uncomfortable with what I've said, come and tell me. Because they're not going to come and tell you, because you're the person that holds the authority. I want the
Mm.
coach to say to that learner or child, if you feel uncomfortable with something that I've done or said, I want you to go and tell another adult. I encourage you. Actually, if you do that, you will be rewarded, because we know that we come from a place of, snitches get stitches and all those kinds of things. And the only way that culture changes is over time. And it needs to be done through clear policies. It needs to be done through practical training. It needs to be done by like creating safe reporting systems. And you spoke about whistleblowing, but whistleblowing is something that we know needs to be in place. But we also need to we also need to reward the resilience when somebody
Mm.
comes forward and makes that report. We need to be thinking about visible leadership support and how do they behave when something arises into their space. And
Yeah.
then we have to follow through. Like, when we see, for example, in the HR space, and those that may work in that space will know that, there was changes to the code of good practice. But one of those things that we see in that space goes, failing to address harassment is harassment.
Mm.
Now, that shouldn't
Mm.
need to be written into law. That should be
Yeah.
something that goes, if you're going to bring a harassment complaint to me, whether you are a client, whether you're a staff member, it doesn't matter. I have a responsibility to enact that. And I need to, and the way I act, my my behavior will empower how that moves
Mm.
forward. And it matters because safeguarding structures that don't work, well, they don't work unless staff feel that they can act. And empowerment turns bystanders into protectors when we close that
Yes.
gap, when we make it the real world. And true safeguarding is when every single staff member, from the CEO to the cleaner, knows that they both have the right and the responsibility to step in, speak up, and to protect those that are around them.
Yeah. Yeah, that is well put. And what I really liked what you said earlier is the fact that it's not a tick box exercise, and that it has to do with, and I mean, you didn't use the word ethics, but there's this combination of culture and ethics training, which, as you say, it's not a tick box exercise. It is something tangible that must exist within an organization. I like that a lot. Farad, that brings me to you. I want to ask, so Mark's talking about policies you must have in place, not a tick box exercise policies, but a policy and a environment or a culture and ethics that must be in place within an organization to create that safeguarding, call it culture. With respect to social media, Farad, do you think you can create that same sort of empowerment that is applicable in, I don't want to say your world, in our world, in the whole world, because the social media is everywhere. Do you have thoughts on that, Farad?
Yeah, so my thoughts is almost identical to Mark's, that it's
Yeah.
very dependent on the culture at play there and the level of trust that a person, an employee, be they the cleaner, be they the receptionist, be they, senior manager or the CEO, the trust that they feel that is involved in terms of the
Mm.
process. The higher the levels of trust, the more empowered those people will feel. And if they feel as though they won't be victimized for reporting anything nefarious or untoward or in our world, as we call it, red flagged behavior, the more likely they are to do so. But also from the social media space, and I suppose from a physical environment space as well, there stands to be a far higher rate of inaccurate reporting or inaccurate claims that are made of somebody's online behavior. So a very fixed, sturdy, robust process with independence needs to be put in place to
Yeah.
create an empowerment from a digital media perspective. Because one of the things that you don't want is, when you work at a company for a long enough period of time, you become familiar with the individuals and you have a fair sense of the person's preferences, likes, dislikes, associations,
Yes.
things as such, right? And I'm going to use a very silly example, because I'm trying to avoid to go to the extreme ones. But if I look within our business, so my head of business development, Dan, is a die-hard Tottenham Hotspur fan. Okay. He would never hire anyone. He would never spend time with someone outside of a work environment who is an Arsenal supporter. Now, there's those sorts of almost tribalism, depending on the subject matter, that's brought into the equation. So why would somebody who is affiliated to a specific political party or religious belief system, or, there's all sorts of variables that you can throw into the equation, go and
Mm.
report something to an individual within the company who is going to investigate, assess, and take things further potentially, who they know that there's that potential clash, hence where the independence section needs to come from. Because from a digital point of view, any form of whistleblowing, as you put it before, or even
Mm.
enforcement of a policy does
Mm.
need to be investigated and overseen from an external point of view. Otherwise, you're creating an environment where you're fostering potential discrimination, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
bias as part of the process. So the simple answer is yes, it can, but you have to have all of the pieces that are put in place first, and those pieces have to be very strong.
Yeah. Interesting, Farad. And you use the line fostering discrimination, creating some kind of atmosphere like that. And it brings me to, back to the word culture, which Mark used as well within an organization. And I always ask myself, like, what does the word culture mean? If you had to sort of define culture, and I always come up with a line that says the culture of an organization is the worst behavior that an organization is prepared to tolerate. That's kind of the way that I look at it, is like the common denominator behavior that an organization will tolerate. So that brings me to my next question, Mark. So if you want to create a culture that is a safeguarding culture, that is ethical and not just a tick box exercise, but creates that safety within the organization's staff as well as outwards towards the clients and general public. If you don't have a policy in place and you suddenly feel you need to do something now, what steps would you do to implement, call it something immediately, which will ultimately become a long-term policy? But if you want to do something kind of quickly, is there something that comes to mind, Mark?
So are you referring to in the absence of policy? Is that your question?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's a bit of a double-edged question, because I'm saying culture is the lowest common denominator of behavior that you're prepared to tolerate. But if you want to
Yeah.
up that,
Yeah.
do you have thoughts on that, Mark?
Okay. So I think from a business protection perspective, the
Mm.
absence of policy is not is not a good idea. I do think that we need to have the rules of the game of safeguarding. We need to kind of go, this is what is expected. But what we do need to bear in mind, essentially, and this is away from, I suppose, the academics of it, and kind of looking at more, I suppose, through like a psychological lens, right? We need to bear in mind that environment dictates behavior significantly more than the
Yeah.
people dictate behavior. And an example I always use is that, you might see a friend of yours or somebody that you know who has got a foul mouth, or somebody who swears a lot, and you see them possibly when you're having a drink with them on a Friday afternoon at the pub, and just the way they are, and you see that exact same person, nothing's different about them, but now you're seeing them on Sunday at church. And
Yeah.
now they're behaving differently, right? And so to me, that is the culture, right? Like what is acceptable? And I think defining what is acceptable is, it should be done in policy, but it has to be almost underwritten or underscored. The DNA of that needs to be respect. It needs to be a case of going, I I may not agree with what you're saying. And that can be, that can be about some like really tough conversations. We can really get into that with persons questioning whether, LGBTQ, trans, race. Like, we can really, really get into some of these hot topics that we see playing out. But if I can
Mm.
engage with you and disagree with you, but be respectful in that space, we
Mm.
then start
Mm.
seeing that safeguarding culture developing, right? If I can say to you that I believe
Mm.
that, I don't know, trans athletes should be able to compete in whatever they identify as, and you
Mm.
say, well, no, that's not the reason for that. You and I can really get upset about it and dislike each other. The fact that you and I have a differing opinion doesn't mean I don't like you. It means
Yeah.
on a issue, we have a differing opinion. And I say to people, like, if having differing opinion means that we are going to dislike somebody, then I don't know that anyone would remain married for more than 3 months. Because in that space, with the person that you believe you love the most, is probably the
Yeah.
person you have the most differing opinions with. But because you care about that person, you will have that differing
Mm.
opinion with respect. And so we want to sit in a situation where we go, I get that you're the manager. I get that you're the client, but I will always, always be respectful. But
Mm.
that is only halfway where we need to go, because the second half of it is that not only will I, when I engage with you, be
Mm.
respectful, but I will demand respect of you to me. I will have enough self-respect in myself to say, I'm not going to be disrespected by you. I'm happy to have a different opinion, but here is my line. I will always be here. I will not.
Mm.
And so when we see clients coming in and being disrespectful to staff, well, the client isn't always right. What they're saying might be that the staff member made a mistake, but they
Yeah.
don't have the rights to be disrespectful. So their
Yeah.
presentation is wrong. They're not always right. Similarly, when we look at employer over employee, very often in certain organizations, we sometimes see it playing out in male over female, or older staff member over younger staff member. At the end of the
Mm.
day, respect should be always given, but should be demanded. And very often that should be addressed in policy.
Yeah.
So we want to have clear policy. We want to have definitions of abuse, harassment, neglect, exploitation, bullying. We
Yeah.
want roles and responsibilities to be identified. We want reporting procedures to be clear. In safeguarding, there's a saying that says, in your organization, it should be harder for me to fall over than to report. That is when safeguarding reporting is really working. It's got to be
Yeah.
that simple. We've got to have a strong
Yeah.
framework, and then our recruitment process, Our recruitment and
Mm.
vetting process has to be almost bulletproof, because when you coming into my culture, when you're coming into my organization, we need to take time to understand who is coming in there. And we need to let them
Yeah.
know, in this organization, this is our code of conduct. This is how we behave. And in behaving that way, if you feel you can't, if you feel that it is unacceptable, it is unacceptable to I don't know, associate with women, or to be in the presence with
Mm.
someone that may identify as well, that's not our culture, so you're wrong here. So to me, I kind of go like, even if someone is if someone just in your organization is there just for a week, they
Mm.
should be fully part of your safeguarding system from day one. Safeguarding
Yeah.
can't wait until they've settled in. It almost has to be something that from the moment you walk in the door, you don't know how to do the job, but
Yeah.
you will be respectful.
Yeah. Mark,
Excuse
that's
me.
powerful. I mean, there was elements of what you were saying. They reminded me of like sort of the French liberalist philosophy. You know, there was that philosopher called Voltaire, and
Yeah.
Voltaire's one of his lines was, "I disagree with you, but I will defend to the death for your right to say so." And you reminded me a little bit of that. You know, it's powerful, but it is quite philosophical, and it's not, as you say, just a checkbox exercise. But there are tools that can help you. As you said, you've got to be bulletproof when you're vetting somebody, and Alan's going to take us through some of that a little bit later. But I thought that was really powerful. Thanks, Mark. I want to ask Farad though. So I mean, here we're talking about policy. And policy is not just, like I say, it's policy regarding ethics, regarding behavior, regarding culture. It is rather philosophical. But with respect to social media policies, Farad, I mean, how do you ensure that they're like kind of industry specific or not just generic? And is there an overlap between the kind of policy that Mark's speaking about and the policy from a social media perspective? Are they kind of one and the same? Do those two circles interlink with one another? Farad, do you have thoughts on that?
I think there's an overlapping between the safeguarding aspect and the social media aspect. And the
Mm.
reason I say so is social media is a space where any existing policy that an organization has can be breached, right? So what
Yeah,
I mean by that is you have a leave policy of annual leave, sick leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, whatever the case may be. But then people can breach that by putting up a Facebook post saying, I'm on sick leave today, but I'm at the Wanderers watching the cricket.
yeah,
I use that one specifically because it happened to a guy that I worked with about 20
yeah.
years ago, right? So social media and safeguarding, I think, is this space that floats, that speaks to everything else that you have in place. So I wouldn't necessarily say industry specific, but it has to be customized and tailored for each organization because, as Mark said, every organization has a unique culture. And they have to be aware of what that culture is. And that culture feeds their other policies. And it also speaks to things like the social media policy. So your social media policy is actually one that's exceptionally difficult to design and to implement because
Mm.
a lot of organizations, number one, as you say, or as you were mentioning about generic templates. So
Yeah,
honestly, I've reviewed probably about 3 or 4 thousand South African businesses' social media policies. And the common thing that I see is they have Googled social media policy and they've copied and pasted it,
yeah,
number one. And those are the more advanced ones. Typically, a social media policy is a subsection of either the IT policy relating to hardware and bandwidth usage,
yeah.
or it's a subsection of the marketing policy. Whereas it's not something that is robust enough, it's not something that's expansive enough that speaks to things such as, disclosing confidential company information through a tweet, through a picture, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It's got to cover all of the other areas of things like sexual harassment, discrimination, defamation, illegal activities. Okay, your social media policy, people can engage in criminal activity through social media. The difference is a criminal check will show you a conviction or an outcome, and social media, they just haven't been caught yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex place. So, and going back to the original question, industry specific, I suppose you can do such, but
Yes.
it's more specific relating to each unique business, each unique organization, their identity, their DNA, their culture. That is at play. That's what a social media policy should be aligned to.
Yeah. Yeah. I must say, I mean, you've just made a point which always rings in my mind, and that is the question: if you're running criminal checks or you look at the sexual offenders list and so on, but they're only the convicted ones.
Yeah.
The difficulty are the ones that are under our noses that aren't convicted yet. But I think the social media exposure is where you will get clues, I am sure, and in that kind of culture and behavior within an organization, you'll get clues with respect to that behavior like that. I want to come back to the reporting tools. Mark, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, like whistleblowing. A lot of big organizations have a whistleblower kind of email that people can log onto. And, the effectiveness of those vary. And, it depends on how they are designed, how they're communicated, and whether they're trusted by employees. Can you just come back to that topic a little bit for us regarding reporting tools? Your experience with respect to that, and how they help risks and, I'll call it risks, be exposed, which would ordinarily go unnoticed. Do you have thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, so I think, excuse me. So I think that when we look at whistleblowers, when we look at the legislation like the Protected Disclosures Act, and when we
Yeah.
look at those kinds of things, and then we look at the industries that are built on the back of that, so that organizations are able to almost create an arm's length from a report that will come in. So it creates, people will argue, it creates a challenge, because if I don't know who my accuser is and I don't have the ability to cross-examine my accuser, then you can't accuse me, because then it's some unknown person's word against mine. And how do we manage that, right? How do we kind of go, Mark, somebody said that you did this, and I say, well, I didn't do it. Well, the somebody, I said, well, can you tell me who the somebody is, so that I can at least find out? Well, no, we can't tell you who that person is. And so
Yes.
I completely understand the aversion to kind of that space, right? But then there's two other, to me, extremely positive elements in the whistleblowing space. The first is that it gives management the ability, even if they can't act on the specific transgression, it gives them the ability to have an understanding of the frustration of what might be happening at grassroots level that they may not be building into their strategic or management decisions, because we see that in that whistleblowing
Yes.
space. And then the other thing that it says is, it says about the company, is that we are here to listen. You may not want to tell us, but
Yeah.
we're prepared to listen. And the statement of saying we're prepared to listen, the statement of saying we care about you, talks directly into the trumpet I've been blowing the whole time, which is essentially getting to the point of going, we need to create the culture. So
Yeah.
we can't have having a safeguarding policy is a good idea, because it says, as an organization, we have a culture where safeguarding is important. Doing checks to your point, doing checks is only going to catch people. It's only going to tell me that you've never been caught. That's what it's going to tell me. It's not that's what it's going to. Well, you're clear. All I know is you've never been caught. But the gateway to get into that business required checks. It told me something about the culture of that organization. And so when you're keeping an eye on, what Farad's talking about, social media posts, it talks to the
Yes.
culture. It says that if I'm aware of something, this company cares. And that needs to be backed up by action. And so, in all honesty, if you didn't have policy, which I am certainly not advocating because I'm a strong advocate for safeguarding policy, right? But if you didn't have policy, but you created a culture where people behaved in a continually respectful way towards each other, we would be creating a place where safeguarding would become part of your environment. And that has so many positive business spin-offs, because one thing we mentioned earlier is duty of care. We are literally seeing civil claims in the millions based on duty of care failure. We are so often see what we call trial by media, but massive reputational damage because someone didn't care. Doing training on communication is important. Like, we want to get to a point where I am your manager, and if it's my opinion, and I'm old. I come from the time when I first started working where you did what you do because your manager told you to do it. Now, yes, you will do it because the manager has said so. But if the manager can get your buy-in, well, you're going to do it so much better. And the best way to do that is to ensure that that communication happens respectfully. And that's not just about me saying something respectfully. It's about me also taking time to understand that when it lands with you, you receive it respectfully, because I may not be intentionally being disrespectful. So I might be a A-type or right-sided brain person, which means I am, do it now, let's go, it's on it, let's move, let's move. You're a planner. Now, for you to sit there as my boss, as the planner, and give me all the things that is going to happen, I'm sitting there going, all right, well, let me go and do it. Let me just go and do it. It's like you're talking too much, and so I'm becoming frustrated. Conversely, on the other side of the coin, right, is I'm the boss, I'm the A-type brain, and I say, go and do this, and I need it done by tomorrow. And you're going to go, well, I mean, I haven't planned it. I don't know when it's going to start, when it's going to finish, where we get the resources from. What if this doesn't work? What if that person's absent? And so the planning in your brain goes like this. And so taking time to understand people and taking time, it's that old adage, like, people don't leave organizations, people leave people. And so safeguarding sits so squarely in that, is that you want to be cared for, you want to be considered, you want to be acknowledged, and then you will arrive and you will do what you need to do. And as the business owner, you are protecting your company, you're protecting it financially, you're protecting it reputationally. There are so many positive benefits of implementing strong safeguarding policy, and so by extension, safeguarding culture.
Absolutely. And I mean, it just brings me back to your words again, where you said it's not a tick box exercise. A lot of, putting a board up to say where the fire hydrant is partly a tick box exercise. But this is far more, it's philosophical, and there's a bit of sociology involved in this. And I find it really, really interesting. And I think having a whistleblower anonymous email, many organizations would say, oh, well, now I've done my bit, but it actually goes a lot further. I mean, the culture must go a lot further than just having that accessibility. You need leadership accountability. And of course, the other thing, which none of us have mentioned yet, is that that fear of retaliation. There mustn't ever be a fear of retaliation or retribution for someone who reports. Which brings me to the question really for Farad now, is this anonymous reporting, do you see that that can also spill over into the digital realm, into the social media realm, that I'm doing certain things on social media, but we're doing some reporting or someone's reporting on my nefarious behavior on social media on our internal company mechanisms? Do you have thoughts on that, Farad?
Yeah, I do. It's a very tricky one, that the whistleblowing, as I said before, from digital activity is very difficult to implement, because it's very reliant on, one, trust, two, process, and three, impartiality. Because who internally in the organization is going to make the determination and conduct the investigation and assessment if this reported activity is in fact in breach of a social media policy or legislation, for that matter, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
you have those, as you said, I did see a question in the Q&A. I had a quick look sneakily
Okay.
about whistleblowing and the people essentially having access to Grind. And we all know that there's all sorts of internal company and personal politics at play within organizations. Now,
Mm,
that could very well be the case, but having the best way to have an anonymous form of um, reporting of transgressions of online behavior is for it to come to someone internal who refers it to an external party to conduct the assessment and make the determination. Is this against your company policy? Is it against your company social media policy? And is it in contravention of any form of legislation? So it is something that you can implement, but you need to have the other processes in place to be
yes,
able to implement such.
yes, yes. Farad, I'm going to stay with you for a second, and I'm conscious of time though as well. Um, Mark was mentioning, we need to um, bulletproof check people, reference check people before they are employed. Social media screening. What kind of red flags should employers be looking at with respect to social media screening?
Well, I think the obvious ones are the criminal activity and behavior, right? Or anything that can cause image or reputational harm to your organization.
Yes,
So high frequency of various forms of discrimination. We have in South Africa the Hate Crimes Act, which actually covers 17 different areas of discrimination, which most people are completely oblivious to and unaware of what those different 17 categories are.
yes,
Um, you should be on the lookout for things such as highly reactive and aggressive behaviors. You know, I can give you a very quick story or anecdotal story of someone that we screened years ago that came out as very high risk with highly reactive behaviors, discriminatory views with regards to LGBTQI people.
mm,
The problem was that the organization sent a letter of offer and the candidate accepted it prior to running a social media check.
okay,
So by the time the check came back, the check reported highly aggressive behaviors, highly reactionary behaviors, discrimination specifically targeted towards LGBTQI people.
yes,
This translated into the workplace because within 3 months, the person on a Monday morning was having a conversation with a coworker about how was your weekend, the general chit chat.
yeah,
And the person, the candidate who was hired, found out that the person that they were having a conversation with, that their brother is gay. And this caused a heated debate. And the debate got even further heated. And eventually, a punch was thrown by the newly appointed candidate. So
yeah,
these red flags should be looked out for. And it very similarly to what you were saying with Voltaire, right?
yeah,
What is it that you're willing to accept?
mm,
But that
mm,
what you're willing to accept also has to be considering the best interests of your existing people within the business and what is safest and best for them at the same time.
yeah. Farad, that's really interesting. I mean, I can see now by your example that you gave, call it a social media behavior, it's transposed directly into the work environment, and that the policy that you should have in place, and the policy, I mean, Mark was mentioning it, the policy is way bigger than just a piece of paper with a document. It is a culture that runs from the leadership all the way down. And that brings me, I'm getting a flag here to say we're going to be running out of time. So I need to move on. So, gentlemen, that was really, really very, very insightful. I'm going to move on now. And, if I look at the screen behind Farad, there is our logo, LexisNexis, and underneath there it says advancing the rule of law. And if you had to ask someone, what does that really mean? People don't have an off-the-cuff answer for that. My off-the-cuff answer for that is doing the right thing is always the right thing. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alan, who's going to take us through some of the salient features of RefCheck. And that is in order to make sure that you screen your prospective employees properly in order to make sure that they play part in the culture of your organization. Alan, can I mute my mic and hand over to you? Don't hear you, Alan. I don't know if the others hear Alan. Farad, Mark, can you hear Alan?
No.
Not yet. Al,
Alan,
can you talk up a bit?
Alan, we can see your smile, but I can't hear your voice. No, okay. We seem to have a technical difficulty there with Alan at the moment. I can see Mark and myself and Farad. Okay, so right, we'll get back to Alan in a second. But one of the things that I find interesting is a company like ourselves, it's got access to these massive, massive data sources. And so does almost everyone, on Earth have access to all sorts of information and data sources. And they can be used in one of two ways. It can be used in a positive way to do the right thing, because it's always the right thing. And then really, like Farad also illustrated, it can be used in the wrong way. And we've got to get this balancing act right, is to use data in the proper way and use the social media in the proper way. And so that we can all create that culture, that common denominator of what we're prepared to tolerate has got to be pretty high, not pretty low. Alan, can we do a test? Or are you back up?
Yes, hello, George. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes, positive. We can hear you. I'll put on mute.
My machine is like one of those old cars. It needs to warm up a bit before you can hear me.
Okay, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, George. And thank you so much to Dr. Mark and also to Farad. Dr. Mark, must say your passion is contagious. Yeah, it's the first time. It's very insightful. So thank you so much for that. So guys, my name is Alan. I'm a sales manager here at LexisNexis, looking after the product Lexis RefCheck, which I'm going to be showcasing just in a nutshell on what checks you can use in order to safeguard your staff, your employees, children, so on and so on. So the various checks that we do have on offer specific to this webinar is your criminal verification check, which is also linked to SACE, your South African Council of Educators. We can do qualification verifications, identity verification, a character reference, and also social media screening, as Farad mentioned. So I just need to emphasize that RefCheck is a comprehensive solution providing background screening and verifications for current staff and new employees that you recruit. It is also a registered service provider for SACE criminal checks, offering information not only on convicted cases, but also on case awaiting trials, which reflects prior to NRSO and NCPR registers being updated. So starting with your criminal verification check, once you've logged into the system, this is what you'll see. And those are the various criminal checks we have available. You've got the standard, the premium, and also the priority. The turnaround time for your standard criminal verification check is 24 hours. Your premium is 4 hours, and your priority is 2 hours. Moving on to your qualifications, anything that ranges from a matric pre-1992, matric post-1992, Umalusi other, N levels, academic qualifications South Africa, academic qualifications on the African continent, excluding South Africa, and also academic qualifications globally. And then lastly is your social media check. Just like Farad mentioned, it's not snooping around, but it's to identify public red flags. To give you an example, discriminatory remarks or inappropriate conduct, and it also helps institutions maintain integrity. And in closing, RevCheck, it's billed transactionally, so it's a transactional model, meaning there's no subscription costs, and also there's no cancellation terms. And we do have batch processing available. If you have more than 50 individuals which you would like to screen, we can assist you with that. Thank you very much, George. So everybody, a poll's going to come up now for you to answer some questions if you would like to be contacted.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you very much. Alan, can just double check. Can you hear me?
I can, George.
Grand. Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, PR, please complete that poll that you see on your screen now. That the gathering of that information is very important for us, so that we can assist you accordingly. And that we're on at the top of the hour brings us to an end, really. So I want to thank, well, Alan, for your portion now, but certainly to Mark and Farad, thank you so much for your insight, and most especially to everyone who joined us today. And like Mark said, safeguarding isn't just a checkbox; it's a cultural commitment. And I must say, I found that really, really informative, and I like the philosophy behind it as well. It's through robust policies and social media screening, we can empower our staff to act properly. And the goal is the same, is to create environments where people feel safe, respected, and supported. I mean, don't we all just want to live like that? We want to be in a place where we are safe, respected, and supported. And I mean, I can hear Mark's voice now. I'm going to sleep with his voice in my ear saying, respect, respect, respect. I mean, and that is the cornerstone of it for me. So we're heading into this festive season towards the end of the year. Like I said earlier, it's not now the time, it's always the time to make sure that your policies are in place. Make sure that you train your teams and educate and build this culture and this ethical framework. Make sure, like Alan showed you, that your onboarding process reflects your values, and be sure to keep it all year round. Like I said, it's not just a December thing. Like I said, your will when you're flying overseas, protect it all year round. So ladies and gentlemen, between all of us, let's build workplaces where safeguarding is second nature. It's absolutely fundamental, where every employee becomes part of the solution. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Our panelists, Mark and Farad, thank you for your time. And we look forward to a continued conversation in the future. And thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.